So, this bank holiday weekend, I set myself a little task because, thanks to eBay's recommendations, I ended up with this. And this is a very, very early version of an audiobook. Now, of course, these days, you get your audiobooks from places like Amazon's Audible or any other service like that. And you might even perhaps record them onto one of these back in the day. This is a mini iPod. With the old click wheel, which was all the rage back in the sort of early 2000s. So even this is now vintage / retro IT equipment. But these audiobooks, I say these because I also picked up a job. I do pick these up in a job lot. So we have Street Talk, we have The Wuzzles. Now none of these I have tapes for, and that's the part I'm coming to. Return to Oz. Interesting film, actually. I haven't watched it for ages, but I might read that book shortly. Wurzel Gummidge. John Pertwee used to be a Doctor Who. Barbie Camping Adventures. Which is a job lot, as I say. 101 Dalmatians. But if I tried to get just this by itself, it would have cost me about 4 times what this job lot cost me. So that's why I went for the job lot. And I've got the video up of this now, having done my little task over the last couple of days. And the reason I had to do a task was because the audio book came on this. Now this, for the younger viewers, is an audio cassette tape. And I discovered on getting this off eBay for quite a reasonable price, with a selection of others. Unfortunately, none of the others match up with these books, but this one matched up with the Zoids book, so that was all good. But it's only really short tape, but I had nothing that would play it. So I thought to myself, right, I have 2 options here. I can do the obvious thing and go on Amazon and get myself a cassette player, because they still exist, they're still sold. But I thought I'm going to go down the more retro vintage route, because it occurred to me that I've seen in one of the local sort of cabinet places, so like one of those antiques places that have people's cabinets where they have various bits of stock in. I recalled that I'd seen vintage cassette players, Walkman. And in fact, I've ended up with a rather nice Sony Walkman. I've never actually owned a proper Walkman before. I've had cassette players when I was much, much younger by people like Iowa, I think it was, but I never actually had a Sony Walkman. So I now have a Sony Walkman to my name. And as I hoped, I had a 3.5mm audio to 3.5mm audio jack cable. And my Tower PC has a traditional old-fashioned 3.5mm audio in jack, which you can use with a microphone. So, of course, what I was able to do then was pipe the sound from this directly into my PC. Problem solved. So I encoded this. I scanned this page by page and produced the video that is now available on the channel. And as a bonus, I now have a radio and / cassette portable player. And if I do them, they came with a battery and everything. Al's Emporium in the Peace Hall in Halifax, if you're interested. So, the other thing that came about from that little exercise was that as I was flicking through The Legend of Heroic Combat, I came across images like this, and I thought, this is really confusing because that seems really familiar to me, and yet this is not a book that's produced by Marvel. It's produced by a company called Rainbow, and they did various other titles, as you can see there. So quite a lot of the classic sort of 1980s IP got audiobooks in this fashion. So, I mean, this is quite mature. In some respects, it's not sort of kiddie as audio. I mean, you've shown you some examples there of things that were clearly very, very kiddie, but that's why it's like different companies. But basically, you just get a book and a tape, and you would listen along, and it would tell you when to turn the page. And if you have a look at the other video, you'll see exactly what I mean. But what was puzzling me was that this is from 1985, and I thought, I'm sure I've seen these images before. So I went back to this Zoids annual, which again you'll have seen a video on the channel for, and started flicking through it, and immediately, first page, boosh, and there you have a slightly edited down version of that image that I've just shown you in the Zoids Legend of Heroic Combat book. But interestingly, this came before the annual, in terms of the the copyright marking at least. So very interesting. This image is also in there. So clearly the annual reused the images from Zoids Legend of Heroic Combat. But that's not the entire story either, as it turns out, because not only did they appear there, they also appeared here. Now, if you followed my flick through of Spider-Man and Zoids, which lasted for a full hour, this was actually the first example of Zoids in a comic book that I could find when I was doing a bit of research for Spider-Man and Zoids, and inadvertently got the whole set of it. But this is interesting because in these very pages is is a sort of an introduction to Zoids as an advert. But these images, this strip, would appear to be the source for what is in the audiobook, unless it's the other way round. But I think this must have come first, because there are more images here than are used in the audiobook. Because, of course, when you think about it, and this makes perfect sense, when they do a comic book, they do the images, and then they put the text on top of the images. So what I've got here is the same images, but with comic book speech bubbles and so on them. Whereas in the audiobook, you have you have the images without the speech bubbles. So I'll show you exactly what I mean. And the storyline is actually very, very similar between this audiobook and this particular strip. But you can see there that those images are basically the same. So the only difference is that they've been incorporated into a comic, whereas this one's had it incorporated into an audiobook. So I suspect that originally, because this Secret Wars predates the Spider-Man and Zoids comic itself and came out in September 85, I'm guessing that sort of prologue kind of comic strip that they did for Secret Wars and probably elsewhere was incorporated into the Legend of Heroic Combat, and they used that as part of the overall advertising for Zoids, full stop. So I thought that was all quite clever of them. It's an interesting example of where the marketing material gets kind of reused a lot. It's clearly a good way to reuse stuff that you've already had produced at cost. But what's also interesting is that the Legend of Heroic Combat book doesn't mention Marvel at all. But I would bet you bottom dollar that the strip was produced by Marvel, given that they then had the ongoing rights to produce Spider-Man and Zoids as a comic, which does make that rainbow copyright claim sort of interesting. And in fact, there's nothing in the Rainbow book to say who did the artwork or who did the words for the story either. So I couldn't credit them in the video that I did, because there just isn't any detail there, which again I find kind of interesting, because generally as a basic you would expect that sort of information in there, the authorship information. So it was just one of those interesting coincidences, because I remember when I started doing the hour-long Spider-Man Zoids video, when I looked at the prologue strip in Secret Wars there's something was niggling me, and I thought, I'm sure this looks really familiar, where have I seen it before? But actually, of course, I'd seen it in the annual, and then I ended up with the audio book, which is literally an audio book, which is what makes me smile. So we call them audio books now, but they were literally books with audio back in the day. So it was just all three of them are interlinked, because they were all reusing the same artwork. But it's, as I say, it makes perfect sense. But it just goes to show the amount of effort that goes into marketing and advertising these toy lines, because they're doing it across it was a multimedia launch in effect, to be pushing it with an audio cassette as well. And it's clever for Zoids, because Zoids didn't have a cartoon at that point in time. So actually, to be able to hear something and then sort of have that mixed in with the imagery and text as well, it's very world building, which I think is quite clever, because it means that if you're someone like me who enjoys that sort of thing, that's a very appealing way to then sell the toy line to you. So yeah, it was really, really cleverly done, I thought. So fair dues to Tomy. I think they played a bit of a blinder there if you were the right sort of child to be into that sort of thing. So I just thought I'd share that little sort of bit of sort of background to the making of. Probably the least likely making of ever. But it does mean that if I get any more of these cassettes, because I do now have books, like the Street Hawk one I'd quite like to hear. It would be interesting to hear what the voice acting's like in it, if nothing else. But I'll have to find the tape for that one, because I don't have the tape for it. But I've got tape for like the gummy bears and stuff, random stuff like that. So there's potentially a sub-collection there brewing, but I'm not sure if I particularly want to go down that road. But because I've been down the Zoids rabbit hole of late, I just thought I'd share that with you. So that's it for now. I'm about to do some other videos for you as well. So do like and subscribe, and hit the bell to be notified of new releases. Thank you.